My name is Elena Moreau, and at 31 years old, I thought I knew my brother better than anyone else in the world. We had built something beautiful together over the past 8 years, a thriving artisanal bakery chain called Golden Wheat that had grown from our grandmother's old recipes into a multi-million-dollar enterprise spanning across Northern California. What I discovered 3 weeks ago shattered everything I believed about family, loyalty, and the business we had poured our hearts into. When I found out that Marcus had secretly transferred his 50% ownership stake to his girlfriend's father for exactly $1, I could barely contain my shock. But what he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this possibility longer than he could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Our story begins 12 years ago, when I was fresh out of culinary school, and Marcus had just graduated with his MBA from Berkeley. Our grandmother, Elena Moreau, had passed away the previous winter, leaving us her small bakery in Sonoma County along with a wooden recipe box containing generations of French pastry secrets. The bakery was struggling, barely making enough to cover rent, but it held decades of our family's history within its weathered brick walls. I still remember the day Marcus and I sat in that tiny office above the bakery, surrounded by boxes of outdated financial records, and the lingering scent of yesterday's bread. The afternoon sun streamed through dusty windows as we discussed whether to sell the property, or attempt to revive what had once been the heart of our small community. Marcus spread his business projections across the scarred wooden desk that had belonged to our grandmother, his fingers tracing revenue charts and market analysis reports. "Elena, look at these numbers," he said, his dark eyes bright with possibility. "If we modernize the operations, expand the product line, and really leverage social media marketing, we could turn this place into something extraordinary." I leaned over his shoulder, studying the carefully calculated forecasts, feeling a spark of excitement that matched his own. But it would mean starting completely over. New equipment, new branding, probably knew everything except the recipes. That conversation changed the trajectory of our lives. We decided to honor our grandmother's legacy by transforming her modest neighborhood bakery into something she never could have imagined. Marcus handled the business side, while I focused on perfecting the recipes and developing new products that honored our French heritage while appealing to modern tastes. We worked 18-hour days for months, sleeping on an air mattress in the office and surviving on day-old pastries and strong coffee. The early years were brutal. We maxed out credit cards, took out multiple loans, and convinced our parents to mortgage their house to help fund our expansion. Every decision was made together, every risk carefully calculated and mutually agreed upon. Marcus proved to be a brilliant strategist, identifying market opportunities and negotiating deals that seemed impossible for two young entrepreneurs with more passion than experience. I developed signature items that became local legends: our lavender honey croissants, rosemary focaccia bread, and the chocolate hazelnut tarts that eventually landed us features in 3 major food magazines. By our 3rd year, we had opened a second location in Napa. By year 5, we had 6 bakeries across wine country, and were shipping our specialty items nationwide through an online platform Marcus had designed. The business had grown beyond our wildest dreams, but we had grown along with it. Marcus had developed into a sophisticated businessman who could negotiate complex contracts and manage dozens of employees, while I had evolved from a passionate baker into an executive chef overseeing quality control across multiple locations. Our partnership was built on complete trust and transparency. We each owned exactly 50% of Golden Wheat, a decision we had formalized with proper legal documentation when the business really started taking off. Every major decision required both of our signatures. Every expansion, every new hire, every significant expenditure was discussed thoroughly before implementation. We had learned from watching other family businesses implode over power struggles and financial disagreements, so we established clear protocols for everything. The success of Golden Wheat exceeded every projection Marcus had made in those early planning sessions. Last year alone, we generated over $4 million in revenue across our 12 locations. Food Network had approached us about a reality show. 3 different investment groups had made offers to buy us out for amounts that would have set us up for life. But we had always agreed that Golden Wheat was more than just a business. It was our grandmother's legacy, our family's contribution to the communities we served, and the foundation for the life we were building together. Marcus had always been protective of our business, sometimes to an almost obsessive degree. He insisted on personally reviewing every contract, every partnership proposal, every piece of correspondence from potential investors. "We can't be too careful," he would say when I occasionally suggested delegating more responsibility to our capable management team. "This is our life's work. No one will care about it the way we do." I respected his diligence, though sometimes I wondered if his controlling tendencies might eventually become problematic as we continued to grow. 2 years ago, Marcus started dating Sofia Castellanos, a marketing consultant he met at a wine industry conference in San Francisco. She was undeniably striking, tall and elegant, with the kind of polished sophistication that came from growing up wealthy in Pacific Heights. Sofia had attended Stanford for both undergraduate and graduate school, spoke 3 languages fluently, and seemed to know influential people in every industry. From the beginning, I sensed something calculating about her interest in Marcus, though I kept those concerns to myself. Sofia was charming enough when we were all together, asking thoughtful questions about the business and expressing admiration for what we had built. She often brought expensive wine to our family dinners and remembered personal details about our employees that impressed even me. But there were subtle signs that troubled me. The way she steered conversations toward our financial success, her pointed questions about our expansion plans, and her habit of suggesting that Marcus deserved more recognition for his contributions to the business. "You're the real visionary here," I overheard her telling Marcus during a company holiday party last year. "Elena is talented, certainly, but the strategic thinking that built this empire? That's all you." When Marcus protested that we were equal partners who each brought essential skills to the operation, Sofia smiled and touched his arm in a way that seemed both affectionate and dismissive. "You're too modest. Everyone can see that you're the driving force behind Golden Wheat's success." These conversations made me uncomfortable, but Marcus seemed oblivious to any potential manipulation. He was clearly infatuated with Sofia, and I didn't want to risk damaging our relationship by expressing suspicions that might have been unfounded. Besides, Marcus was an intelligent businessman who had always shown excellent judgment in his professional dealings. Surely he would recognize if someone was trying to use him for personal gain. 6 months ago, Sofia began attending our monthly board meetings as Marcus's guest. She claimed to be interested in learning about small business operations for her consulting work, and Marcus was eager to show off both his girlfriend and his business acumen. During these meetings, Sofia would take detailed notes and ask penetrating questions about our profit.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Margins, our debt obligations, and our plans for future expansion. Her insights were often valuable, and even I had to admit that her suggestions occasionally led to improved processes or cost savings. But I started noticing changes in Marcus's behavior and decision-making style. He became more secretive about certain aspects of the business, particularly our financial relationships with vendors and our negotiations with potential investors. When I asked about his private meetings with our accountant or his solo trips to meet with business associates, he would give vague explanations about exploring opportunities that might not pan out. "I don't want to get your hopes up until I know more," he would say, which seemed reasonable enough at the time. The first real warning sign came 4 months ago, during a heated discussion about whether to accept a purchase offer from a major food corporation. The offer was substantial, enough to make us both wealthy beyond anything we had ever imagined, but it would have meant losing control of Golden Wheat and potentially seeing our carefully crafted brand absorbed into a massive corporate structure. I was firmly opposed to the sale, believing that our grandmother's legacy deserved better than becoming another generic product line in some conglomerate's portfolio. Marcus initially agreed with my position, but after several conversations with Sofia, he began expressing doubts about our decision. "Maybe we're being sentimental," he said during one particularly tense discussion. "This could be our chance to secure our financial future and move on to bigger opportunities." When I reminded him of our commitment to preserving what our grandmother had started, he seemed almost irritated by the sentiment. "Elena, We've already honored her memory by building something successful. At some point, we have to think practically about our own lives. That conversation marked a shift in our dynamic that I couldn't quite articulate at the time. Marcus had always been ambitious, but his ambition had previously been focused on growing Golden Wheat into something sustainable and meaningful. Now he seemed more interested in maximizing short-term financial gain, even if it meant abandoning the principles that had guided our partnership from the beginning. When I tried to discuss my concerns with him, he dismissed them as resistance to change and suggested that I was being overly emotional about business decisions that required practical thinking. Around this same time, I started noticing irregularities in our financial documentation that concerned me as the company's co-owner and chief operating officer. Small discrepancies in our quarterly reports, vendor payments that didn't match the invoices I had approved, and legal fees for services I didn't remember authorizing. When I brought these issues to Marcus's attention, he assured me that everything was related to routine business maintenance and compliance requirements that didn't require my direct involvement. "I'm handling the administrative details so you can focus on what you do best," he explained during one of our increasingly rare private conversations. "The baking, the quality control, the creative development. That's where your expertise really shines. Let me worry about the paperwork and legal compliance." His explanation made sense on the surface, but something about his tone suggested that he was deliberately trying to exclude me from certain aspects of our business operations. My growing unease prompted me to take a step that might have seemed paranoid, but proved to be crucial in protecting my interests. I quietly hired my own attorney, Patricia Valdez, a sharp corporate lawyer who specialized in partnership disputes and business fraud. Patricia had handled a similar case for a friend of mine, whose business partner had attempted to dilute her ownership stake through complex financial maneuvers. When I explained my concerns about Marcus's recent behavior and the financial irregularities I had noticed, Patricia's expression grew serious. "Elena, what you're describing could be preparation for some kind of major business transaction that excludes you," she said, reviewing the documentation I had brought to her office. "The secretive meetings, the financial discrepancies, the attempts to minimize your involvement in business decisions. These are classic warning signs that your partner might be planning something significant without your knowledge or consent." She recommended that we immediately conduct a thorough audit of Golden Wheat's financial records and legal standing to ensure that no unauthorized changes had been made to our partnership agreement or corporate structure. The audit revealed several concerning developments that Marcus had concealed from me. He had been in negotiations with multiple potential buyers for Golden Wheat, including some who were interested in acquiring only his 50% stake rather than purchasing the entire company. He had also been exploring complex financial arrangements that would have allowed him to extract significant value from his ownership position while potentially leaving me in a disadvantageous situation. Most troubling of all, he had been working with a team of lawyers and financial advisors without my knowledge, developing strategies for restructuring the business in ways that would have fundamentally altered our partnership. Patricia's investigation also uncovered information about Sophia's family background that cast her interest in Marcus and our business in a much more calculating light. Her father, Roberto Castellanos, was a successful real estate developer who had built his fortune by acquiring and redeveloping small businesses in gentrifying neighborhoods throughout Northern California. His typical strategy involved identifying family-owned enterprises with valuable real estate assets, gaining influence over the business operations through various means, and then converting the properties to more profitable uses like luxury condominiums or high-end retail spaces. "This isn't coincidence, Elena," Patricia explained as she showed me records of Roberto Castellanos' previous acquisitions. "Your bakery locations are prime real estate in some of the most desirable areas of wine country. The land alone is worth millions, even without considering the value of the business operations. If someone could acquire control of Golden Wheat, they could shut down the bakeries and redevelop those properties for enormous profit." The implications of this revelation were staggering. Sophia's relationship with Marcus might have been orchestrated from the beginning as part of her father's business strategy. Armed with this information, I began documenting everything I could about Marcus's recent activities and the changes in his behavior. I made copies of all financial records, correspondence, and legal documents related to Golden Wheat. I also started recording our conversations using an app on my phone, wanting to have evidence of any admissions or contradictions in his explanations of his secretive behavior. Patricia had advised me that if Marcus was indeed planning to betray our partnership, having detailed documentation would be essential for protecting my interests and potentially pursuing legal remedies. 3 weeks ago, my worst fears were confirmed in the most shocking way possible. I was working late in our flagship Sonoma location, testing new recipe variations for our spring menu, when I decided to stop by the office to retrieve some financial reports I needed for the next day's meeting with our accountant. As I climbed the stairs to the second-floor office space, I could hear Marcus's voice through the partially open door, engaged in what sounded like an intense phone conversation. "The transfer documents are ready," he was saying, his voice carrying a tone of finality that made me freeze on the staircase. "Once Elena signs the partnership dissolution papers tomorrow, my 50% will officially belong to your father for the agreed-upon consideration." There was a pause as he listened to someone on the other end of the call. $1 is symbolic, obviously. The real compensation will be handled through the consulting arrangement we discussed. Elena will never be able to trace the actual payment back to your family. I stood motionless on the stairs, struggling to process what I was hearing. Marcus was planning to sell his half of our family business to Sophia's father for $1, while receiving his actual compensation through some kind of hidden arrangement that would conceal the true nature of the transaction. The partnership dissolution papers he mentioned were presumably documents that would dissolve our current business structure and leave me vulnerable to losing control of everything we had built together. "She suspects something is wrong, but she doesn't know the specifics," Marcus continued, apparently responding to a question from Sophia. "I've been keeping her focused on the operational side of the business while we finalized the legal arrangements. By the time she realizes what's happening, the transfer will be complete and irreversible." The casual way he discussed deceiving me, his sister and business partner, made my stomach turn with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. As I listened to more of the conversation, the full scope of their scheme became clear. Marcus and Sophia had been planning this betrayal for months, carefully positioning themselves to take control of Golden Wheat, while minimizing my ability to prevent or challenge the transaction. The supposed partnership dissolution was actually a complex legal maneuver designed to restructure the business in a way that would give Roberto Castellanos effective control over our operations and real estate assets. Marcus would receive substantial compensation for his cooperation, but the payment would be disguised as consulting fees to avoid creating obvious evidence of the sale. "Once your father controls my 50%, he'll have enough influence to force major changes in the business structure," Marcus was explaining. "Elena might own the other 50% on paper, but she won't be able to prevent us from redeveloping the properties or selling the real estate assets. The bakery operations will become secondary to the land value, just like we planned." The callousness in his voice as he discussed destroying our grandmother's legacy was almost unbearable to hear. I carefully backed down the stairs and slipped out of the building, my mind racing with the implications of what I had discovered. Marcus was planning to betray not just me personally, but everything our family had worked to build over generations. Our grandmother's recipes, the employees who depended on us for their livelihoods, the communities that had supported our growth. None of it mattered to him anymore compared to the financial opportunity that Sophia and her father had presented. That night, I called Patricia from my apartment and arranged an emergency meeting for the next morning. When I played her the recording I had made of Marcus's phone conversation, her expression grew grimmer with each revelation. "This is fraud, Elena. What your brother is planning constitutes multiple violations of your partnership agreement and potentially criminal activity related to the concealment of the true consideration for the ownership transfer." She immediately began developing a strategy to protect my interests and prevent the completion of Marcus's scheme. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal preparation as Patricia and I worked to understand the full extent of the planned betrayal and develop countermeasures to protect Golden Wheat. We discovered that Marcus had already signed preliminary agreements with Roberto Castellanos that would take effect once the partnership dissolution was finalized. We also found evidence that Sophia had been providing her father with detailed information about our business operations, financial status, and real estate assets for months, essentially conducting corporate espionage while pretending to be a supportive girlfriend. Patricia's investigation revealed that Roberto Castellanos had used similar tactics to acquire at least 6 other family businesses over the past decade, often targeting second-generation owners who had inherited successful enterprises but lacked the business sophistication to recognize sophisticated manipulation tactics. In each case, he had used family members or romantic partners to gain inside access to the target businesses, then structured complex transactions that gave him control while minimizing his visible involvement in the acquisition process. "Your brother has been groomed for this," Patricia explained as we reviewed the evidence we had gathered. "Sophia didn't meet him by accident at that conference. Her father probably identified Golden Wheat as a target months or even years ago, then engineered their introduction to begin the manipulation process. Marcus thinks he's making a smart business decision, but he's actually being used as a tool to steal your family's legacy." The calculated nature of the scheme was both impressive and horrifying in its thoroughness and deception. As I prepared to confront Marcus with evidence of his betrayal, I felt a complex mixture of emotions that I'm still struggling to process completely. The brother I had trusted implicitly, worked alongside for nearly a decade, and considered my closest friend and business partner, had been secretly plotting to destroy everything we had built together. The pain of that personal betrayal was almost overwhelming, but it was compounded by my anger at seeing our grandmother's legacy treated as nothing more than a commodity to be exploited for profit. But beneath the hurt and anger was a steely determination to protect what my family had created, and to ensure that Marcus's betrayal would not succeed. I had spent months preparing for this possibility, gathering evidence and developing legal strategies that would give me the tools I needed to fight back. Patricia had assured me that we had multiple options for preventing the completion of the fraudulent transaction and potentially pursuing criminal charges against everyone involved in the scheme. The confrontation I was planning would not just be about exposing Marcus's betrayal. It would be about forcing him to face the consequences of his choices and protecting the business that represented generations of my family's hard work and dedication. Golden Wheat was more than just a source of income or a valuable asset to be traded for personal gain. It was a legacy, a community institution, and a testament to what could be accomplished through honest work and genuine care for others. Tomorrow, I would present Marcus with evidence of everything I had discovered and demand explanations for his secretive planning and deceptive behavior. I would give him one opportunity to call off the scheme voluntarily and recommit to our original partnership, though I wasn't optimistic about his willingness to abandon plans that had clearly been months or years in the making. If he refused to cooperate or attempted to proceed with the fraudulent transaction despite being exposed, I was prepared to take every legal and ethical step necessary to stop him. The documentation Patricia and I had assembled would be more than sufficient to prevent the completion of the ownership transfer and potentially expose Roberto Castellanos' larger pattern of predatory business practices. We had evidence of the hidden compensation arrangement, proof of Sophia's role in gathering intelligence about our operations, and recordings of Marcus's admissions about the deceptive nature of the planned transaction. Most importantly, we had identified legal remedies that would allow me to maintain control of Golden Wheat while pursuing damages for the harm caused by their attempted fraud. As I sat in my apartment that evening looking through old photographs of Marcus and me working together in our grandmother's original bakery, I felt a profound sadness for what we had lost even before the final confrontation occurred. The trust and partnership that had made our success possible were already destroyed by his choices, regardless of how the legal and business aspects of the situation ultimately resolved. The brother I had loved and respected had revealed himself to be someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of betraying family and legacy for personal gain. But I also felt a fierce pride in the business we had built and the legacy we were supposed to be protecting together. Golden Wheat represented the best of what my family could accomplish when we worked together with integrity and purpose. I wasn't gonna let that legacy be destroyed by someone who had forgotten the values that made our success meaningful in the first place. Whatever happened in the confrontation ahead, I was determined to ensure that our grandmother's memory and the community she had served would be honored and protected. The next morning would mark the beginning of the most difficult period in my life, but I was ready to fight for everything that mattered to me. Marcus had underestimated both my awareness of his schemes and my determination to protect what we had built together. He was about to discover that betraying family comes with consequences he hadn't anticipated, and that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost involved. The morning of the confrontation arrived gray and overcast, matching my turbulent emotions as I prepared to face my brother with evidence of his elaborate deception. I had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing the documentation Patricia and I had compiled, and rehearsing different approaches for the conversation ahead. My coffee grew cold as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the manila folder containing proof of Marcus's betrayal while trying to reconcile the loving brother I had grown up with and the calculating stranger he had apparently become. Patricia had suggested meeting at her law office to ensure we had a controlled environment and proper documentation of whatever Marcus might say during our confrontation. She had also arranged for a court reporter to be present, explaining that any admissions or statements he made could become crucial evidence if we needed to pursue legal action to protect my interests in Golden Wheat. The gravity of the situation was becoming more real with each procedural step we took to prepare for what felt like the end of everything I had believed about my family. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked into Patricia's downtown office, my hands trembling slightly as I carried the evidence that would expose the months of planning and deception that had led to this moment. The receptionist directed me to the main conference room, where Patricia was already arranging documents and testing recording equipment with her usual methodical precision. She looked up as I entered, her expression combining professional competence with genuine sympathy for the personal pain this situation was causing me. "Elena, I know this is incredibly difficult," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat at the polished conference table. "But remember that you're doing the right thing by protecting your grandmother's legacy and the business you've worked so hard to build. Marcus made his choice when he decided to deceive you. Now you're simply responding to protect your legitimate interests." Her words were reassuring, but they couldn't diminish the ache in my chest at the thought of destroying the relationship with the person who had been my closest confidant and business partner for so many years. Marcus arrived 15 minutes late, looking confused and slightly annoyed as Patricia's receptionist escorted him to the conference room. He was dressed in his usual business casual attire, but something about his demeanor seemed different, more guarded and calculating than the open, collaborative brother I remembered from our early days building Golden Wheat together. When he saw me sitting beside Patricia with stacks of documents spread across the table, his confusion quickly transformed into wariness. "Elena, what's going on here?" he asked, remaining standing near the doorway rather than taking the seat Patricia indicated. "Your message said we needed to discuss some urgent business matters, but this looks more like an interrogation than a partnership meeting." His attempt at casual humor fell flat in the tense atmosphere of the conference room, and I could see him assessing the situation while trying to determine how much I might know about his secret activities. "Please sit down, Marcus," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected given the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. "We do need to discuss urgent business matters, specifically your recent activities related to Golden Wheat and your relationship with Roberto Castellanos." The mention of Sophia's father's name caused a visible reaction. Marcus's face went pale and he gripped the back of the chair he was still refusing to occupy. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," he said, finally sitting down but maintaining a defensive posture with his arms crossed. "But if this is about the partnership dissolution papers, I was planning to discuss those with you today anyway. There are some structural changes that could benefit both of us financially, and I wanted to present the options before making any decisions." His prepared explanations sounded rehearsed, confirming that he had anticipated this conversation and developed a strategy for deflecting my concerns. Patricia activated the recording equipment and formally stated the date, time, and participants present for the meeting. She then placed a copy of the partnership dissolution documents in front of Marcus, along with evidence of his communications with Roberto Castellanos and proof of the hidden compensation arrangement that would disguise the true nature of the ownership transfer. Marcus's confident demeanor began to crumble as he recognized documents he thought were safely concealed from my knowledge. "These are preliminary drafts," he said weakly, scanning the papers without making eye contact with either Patricia or me. "Nothing has been finalized, and I certainly haven't committed to anything without discussing it with Elena first. Sometimes it's necessary to explore different options before presenting them to business partners, especially when the arrangements are complex and might require extensive explanation. His attempts to minimize the significance of the evidence were becoming increasingly desperate as the scope of our documentation became clear. I leaned forward, placing the transcript of his recorded phone conversation with Sophia directly in front of him on the conference table. "Marcus, I heard you personally discussing the completion of this transaction. You specifically mentioned that the transfer would be irreversible once I signed these dissolution papers, and you talked about concealing the real compensation through consulting arrangements with Roberto Castellanos. This isn't preliminary exploration. This is active fraud against your own sister and business partner." The color drained completely from Marcus's face as he recognized his own words transcribed on the pages before him. He picked up the document with shaking hands, reading through his recorded statements about keeping me ignorant of the true nature of the transaction and timing the completion to minimize my ability to prevent or challenge the ownership transfer. For several long moments, the conference room was silent except for the sound of pages turning as Marcus absorbed the extent of evidence we had gathered about his deception. "You recorded me without permission," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is illegal wiretapping. You can't use this against me in any legal proceeding." His attempt to challenge the admissibility of the evidence suggested that he was beginning to understand the serious legal jeopardy his actions had created. But Patricia was ready with an explanation of why his objection was irrelevant to our immediate situation. "Actually, Marcus, Elena was in a public space when she overheard your conversation," Patricia replied calmly. "You were conducting business discussions in an office space where other people had legitimate reasons to be present. There was no expectation of privacy, and no laws were violated in documenting statements you made in a location where you could reasonably have been overheard by anyone." She then produced additional evidence showing that Marcus had been using company resources and facilities to plan his betrayal, further undermining any claims of privacy protection. The realization that his legal position was untenable seemed to break something inside Marcus. His shoulders sagged and he put his head in his hands. The confident businessman facade, completely abandoned in the face of irrefutable evidence of his deception. When he looked up again, his eyes were red with unshed tears, but there was also a defiant anger that I had never seen in him before, as if he resented being caught rather than feeling genuine remorse for his actions. "You don't understand the whole situation," he said, his voice gaining strength as his defensive anger overcame his initial shock. Sophia opened my eyes to opportunities that I never would have considered on my own. Golden wheat could be worth so much more than what we're currently generating from bakery operations. Roberto has plans for developing those properties that could make us both wealthy beyond anything we've ever imagined. His attempt to justify the betrayal by framing it as a beneficial opportunity revealed how completely Sophia and her father had manipulated his thinking. "So you decided to make those decisions unilaterally, without consulting your equal partner, while actively concealing your activities and lying about your intentions?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level as my anger began to override the sadness I felt about losing the brother I thought I knew. "You were willing to destroy our partnership, betray our grandmother's legacy, and potentially commit fraud to pursue opportunities that you never even discussed with me?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling to find arguments that would justify his actions, while minimizing his culpability for the deception and betrayal. "Elena, you never would have agreed to any significant changes in the business structure. You're too emotionally attached to the sentimental aspects of what we built, and you don't think strategically about maximizing our financial return on investment. Someone had to be practical about our long-term interests, even if it meant making difficult decisions without full consensus." His condescending explanation of my supposed inability to think strategically about our business was perhaps the most hurtful aspect of the entire confrontation. Marcus was essentially arguing that my commitment to preserving our grandmother's legacy and maintaining the community-focused values that had made Golden Wheat successful was a weakness that justified his deception and betrayal. The arrogance and disrespect underlying his justification made me realize how completely his thinking had been corrupted by Sophia's influence. Patricia intervened before I could respond to Marcus's insulting characterization of my business judgment. "Mr. Moreau, regardless of any disagreements you might have had with your sister about business strategy, the legal fact is that you entered into binding agreements that require mutual consent for major decisions affecting Golden Wheat. Your unilateral negotiations with Roberto Castellanos constitute a breach of your fiduciary duties as Elena's business partner, and the concealment of compensation violates multiple provisions of your partnership agreement. She then presented evidence showing that Marcus had already received preliminary payments from Roberto Castellanos, disguised as consulting fees for business development services, that had never been disclosed to me or properly documented in our company records. The payments totaled nearly $200,000 over the past 6 months, representing substantial compensation for providing inside information about Golden Wheat's operations and facilitating the planned acquisition of his ownership stake. These payments were for legitimate consulting work. Marcus protested weakly, but his explanation became even less credible when Patricia produced communications showing that the supposed consulting services were actually detailed reports about our financial status, expansion plans, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited in a hostile acquisition. Roberto Castellanos had essentially been paying Marcus to conduct corporate espionage against his own family's business. The scope of Marcus's betrayal was staggering in its thoroughness and calculated deception. He had not only agreed to sell his ownership stake for far below its actual value, but he had been actively working to undermine my position as co-owner by providing Roberto Castellanos with information that could be used to force unfavorable changes in our business operations. The monthly reports Marcus had been providing included assessments of my management style, predictions about my likely responses to various scenarios, and recommendations for strategies that would minimize my ability to resist Roberto's control over Golden Wheat. Marcus, you've been selling information about me to someone who wants to destroy our business, I said, my voice shaking with a combination of hurt and fury that I could no longer suppress. You've been analyzing my weaknesses and helping a stranger develop strategies to manipulate and control me. How could you possibly justify that level of betrayal against your own sister? The personal dimension of his deception was almost more painful than the business implications, representing a violation of trust that seemed impossible to repair or forgive. For the first time during our confrontation, Marcus appeared to recognize the full magnitude of what he had done to our relationship. His defensive anger gave way to something that looked like genuine remorse, though I couldn't tell whether he was regretting his actions or simply regretting being caught before he could complete his scheme. He stared down at the evidence spread across the conference table, his hands trembling slightly as he absorbed the documented proof of his months-long campaign of deception and betrayal. I never meant for it to go this far, he said quietly, his voice lacking the conviction of his earlier justifications. At first, Roberto just wanted to understand the business better before making any investment decisions. The information I provided was supposed to help him develop partnership proposals that would benefit all of us. I thought I was facilitating opportunities that would ultimately make us both more successful. His attempt to reframe his espionage as innocent business development rang hollow given the extensive evidence of deliberate deception and concealment. Patricia wasn't content to let Marcus minimize his culpability through vague explanations and self-serving interpretations of his actions. She methodically walked through the timeline of his involvement with Roberto Castellanos, demonstrating how each step had escalated the deception while moving closer to the completion of a transaction that would have effectively stolen my inheritance and destroyed our family's legacy. The documented progression from innocent information sharing to active fraud painted a clear picture of someone who had been gradually corrupted by greed and manipulation. The consulting agreements you signed specifically required you to provide inside information about Golden Wheat's vulnerabilities and Elena's personal characteristics that could be exploited in business negotiations. Patricia explained, reading directly from contracts Marcus had executed with Roberto's development company. You agreed to identify ways to pressure Elena into accepting unfavorable terms for any potential partnership or acquisition, and you provided detailed psychological profiles that were designed to help Roberto manipulate her decision-making process. The clinical language of the consulting contracts made Marcus's betrayal seem even more calculated and heartless. He had essentially agreed to become a psychological weapon that Roberto could use against me, providing intimate knowledge about my personality, business philosophy, and emotional attachments that could be exploited to force me into accepting arrangements that would benefit Roberto at my expense. The violation of trust represented by these contracts was almost incomprehensible in its coldness and calculation. Elena, you have to understand that I was trying to protect both of our interests, Marcus said desperately, reaching across the table as if to touch my hand before thinking better of the gesture. Roberto convinced me that the bakery industry was becoming unsustainable, and that we needed to diversify our assets to avoid losing everything when market conditions changed. He showed me financial projections that suggested golden wheat would be worthless within 5 years unless we adapted to new economic realities. His explanation revealed another layer of the manipulation that Sophia and Roberto had used to gain his cooperation. They had apparently convinced him that our successful business was actually vulnerable to imminent failure, creating artificial urgency that justified taking dramatic action without consulting me or following proper procedures for major business decisions. The sophistication of their psychological manipulation was impressive in its thoroughness, though that didn't excuse Marcus's willingness to betray his own family based on the unverified claims of people he barely knew. Patricia had anticipated this defense and was prepared with independent financial analysis that contradicted every aspect of Roberto's supposed market research. Golden wheat was actually in excellent financial condition, with strong growth prospects and increasing market share in the artisanal bakery segment. Our locations were generating consistent profits, our brand recognition was expanding rapidly, and food industry experts consistently rated us among the most promising small businesses in Northern California. Roberto's pessimistic projections were fabricated to justify the manipulation scheme, not legitimate business analysis. Marcus, you've been in this business for 8 years, I said, my voice heavy with disappointment and sadness. You know our financial condition better than anyone outside this room. You've seen our quarterly reports, our profit margins, our expansion success rate. How could you possibly believe that golden wheat was failing when all the evidence contradicted that conclusion? His willingness to accept Roberto's manufactured crisis over his own direct knowledge of our business success suggested a level of self-deception that was almost as troubling as his betrayal. The confrontation continued for another hour as Patricia methodically presented evidence of every aspect of Marcus's deception, from the initial contact with Sophia through the final preparations for transferring his ownership stake to Roberto. By the end, Marcus had abandoned any attempt to justify his actions, and was simply asking what would happen to him legally and professionally as a result of his choices. The complete collapse of his defensive posture suggested that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had done to our family and our business. That depends on Elena's decision about how to proceed, Patricia explained, outlining the various legal options available for addressing Marcus's breach of fiduciary duty and his participation in Roberto's attempted fraud. We could pursue criminal charges for the consulting payments that weren't properly disclosed, civil damages for the harm caused to Golden Wheat's business interests, or we could negotiate a settlement that focuses on protecting Elena's ownership position while allowing Marcus to avoid prosecution. The choice Patricia presented felt overwhelming in its complexity and implications. Part of me wanted to pursue every available legal remedy to ensure that Marcus faced full consequences for his betrayal, and that Roberto's scheme was completely exposed to prevent him from targeting other family businesses. But another part of me recognized that criminal prosecution would likely destroy any possibility of salvaging our family relationships, and could create additional complications for managing Golden Wheat during a prolonged legal process. I need time to think about this, I said, looking at Marcus as he sat slumped in his chair, seemingly aged by the stress and shame of having his deception completely exposed. This isn't just about business decisions or legal consequences. You've betrayed everything our family stood for, and I'm not sure that can ever be repaired regardless of what happens with the legal aspects of this situation. The personal dimension of his betrayal felt more significant than any financial or business considerations, representing a fundamental breakdown in the trust and love that had defined our relationship since childhood. Marcus looked up at me with tears in his eyes, his voice breaking as he attempted to express remorse that seemed genuine for the first time during our confrontation. Elena, I know I've destroyed everything between us, and I know you'll probably never forgive me for what I've done. But please don't let my mistakes ruin the business we built together. Golden Wheat deserves to survive even if our partnership doesn't. His concern for the business felt authentic, though it was difficult to separate genuine regret from self-serving attempts to minimize the consequences of his actions. The business will survive, I replied firmly, surprised by the strength and certainty in my own voice. But it will survive because I'm going to fight for it, not because you've suddenly developed concern for preserving what you were willing to sell for personal gain. I gathered the documents from the conference table, feeling a strange sense of liberation, despite the pain of the confrontation. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I was facing, and had the tools necessary to protect what mattered most to me. As we prepared to leave Patricia's office, she reminded me that we needed to take immediate action to prevent Roberto from attempting to proceed with his acquisition plans despite the exposure of Marcus's involvement. There was still a possibility that he might try to force some kind of business transaction using other leverage or manipulation tactics, particularly given the substantial investment he had already made in corrupting Marcus and gathering intelligence about Golden Wheat's operations. We'll file for a restraining order preventing any unauthorized changes to Golden Wheat's ownership structure, Patricia explained as we walked toward the elevator. We'll also notify Roberto and his legal team that we're aware of the fraudulent scheme and prepared to pursue criminal charges if they attempt to proceed with any aspect of their planned acquisition. That should be sufficient to shut down their operation, but we'll need to remain vigilant for other approaches they might try. The next few days passed in a blur of legal filings, emergency board meetings, and difficult conversations with employees and family members who needed to understand the situation without being overwhelmed by the personal drama underlying the business crisis. I found myself simultaneously grateful for Patricia's professional competence and devastated by the necessity of treating my brother as a hostile party whose actions threatened everything I cared about preserving. The restraining order was granted without opposition, effectively freezing any potential changes to Golden Wheat's corporate structure while we addressed the attempted fraud. Roberto Castellanos' legal team contacted Patricia within hours of being notified about our evidence, requesting a meeting to discuss, quote, mutually beneficial resolution of any misunderstandings about their business development activities. Their immediate willingness to negotiate suggested that they recognized the weakness of their legal position and wanted to avoid criminal prosecution or public exposure of their manipulation scheme. 3 days after our confrontation, Marcus submitted his formal resignation from all positions with Golden Wheat, citing, quote, irreconcilable differences regarding business strategy and management philosophy, without acknowledging his attempted betrayal or the fraudulent nature of his activities. His resignation letter was coldly professional, devoid of any personal sentiment or recognition of the family relationships he had damaged through his choices. Reading it felt like receiving notification of a stranger's departure, rather than farewell from someone who had been my closest collaborator and friend. The immediate crisis was stabilized, but the emotional aftermath of Marcus's betrayal continued to reverberate through every aspect of my life. I found myself questioning decisions I had made, relationships I had trusted, and assumptions I had held about family loyalty and business partnership. The confidence and optimism that had characterized my approach to building Golden Wheat were replaced by wariness and suspicion that felt necessary for protection, but exhausting to maintain constantly. Staff meetings became exercises in reassurance as employees worried about the stability of their jobs and the future direction of the company. I spent hours explaining that Golden Wheat would continue operating normally despite the departure of one of the founding partners, while privately struggling with the reality that I was now solely responsible for every aspect of a business that had grown far beyond what I could manage effectively by myself. The operational challenges of running 12 locations without Marcus's business expertise were daunting, though I was determined to prove that the company could thrive under my leadership. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Patricia informed me that Roberto Castellanos had agreed to cease all activities related to acquiring any interest in Golden Wheat, and had terminated his consulting arrangements with Marcus, in exchange for our agreement not to pursue criminal charges related to the fraud scheme. He had also agreed to pay substantial damages to compensate for the business disruption and legal expenses caused by his attempted acquisition, though the financial settlement was less important to me than ensuring that he could never again threaten our family's legacy. Marcus had essentially disappeared from our shared business and social circles, reportedly taking a position with a consulting firm in Los Angeles that specialized in helping businesses navigate complex ownership transitions. The irony of his career move wasn't lost on me. He was now presumably helping other families avoid the kinds of betrayals he had perpetrated against his own sister. I had no contact with him beyond the formal communications required to finalize his departure from Golden Wheat, and I honestly wasn't sure whether I would ever be able to have a personal relationship with him again. Sophia had also vanished from the local business community, though mutual acquaintances reported that she had moved to New York to pursue opportunities in corporate development with a major real estate investment firm. Her relationship with Marcus had apparently ended shortly after the exposure of their scheme, suggesting that her interest in him had been purely instrumental rather than genuine affection. The calculated nature of their entire relationship made me feel sympathy for Marcus despite his betrayal, recognizing that he had been manipulated, even as he chose to participate in manipulating me. The hardest part of the aftermath was rebuilding my confidence in my own judgment and decision-making abilities. Marcus's betrayal had succeeded in making me doubt my business instincts and question my ability to recognize deception or manipulation in professional relationships. I found myself second-guessing partnerships, vendor relationships, and employee interactions that had previously felt straightforward and trustworthy. The hypervigilance required to protect against future betrayals was emotionally exhausting and threatened to undermine the collaborative approach that had made Golden Wheat successful. But gradually, with support from Patricia, my remaining employees, and a therapist who specialized in helping business owners recover from partnership betrayals, I began to rebuild both my confidence and the operational structure of Golden Wheat. I hired new management staff to handle the business functions Marcus had managed, implemented additional oversight procedures to prevent unauthorized activities, and established clearer protocols for major business decisions that would protect against future manipulation or fraud. Most importantly, I reconnected with the values and vision that had originally motivated me to preserve and expand our grandmother's legacy. Golden Wheat represented more than just a profitable business or valuable real estate. It was a testament to what could be accomplished through honest work, quality products, and genuine care for the communities we served. Marcus's betrayal had temporarily obscured those fundamental principles, but his departure actually created an opportunity to refocus the company's mission and operations on what truly mattered. 8 months after the confrontation that ended our partnership, Golden Wheat was more successful than ever before. We had opened 2 additional locations, expanded our wholesale operations to supply artisanal products to restaurants throughout Northern California, and established a culinary scholarship program that honored our grandmother's memory while supporting the next generation of bakers and chefs. The business was thriving under my sole leadership, though I had learned to delegate more effectively and rely on trusted advisors rather than trying to manage every aspect personally. The experience had taught me painful but valuable lessons about the importance of protecting what matters most, even when the threats come from unexpected sources. Family loyalty and business success required constant vigilance and clear boundaries, not naive trust in good intentions or shared history. But it had also reinforced my conviction that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost, and that integrity and authenticity ultimately provide a stronger foundation for success than manipulation or deception. Standing in our flagship Sonoma location on a busy Saturday morning, watching customers enjoy pastries made from our grandmother's recipes while my staff worked with obvious pride and satisfaction, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity to preserve and protect this legacy. Marcus's betrayal had threatened everything I valued, but it had also revealed the strength and resilience that would allow Golden Wheat to continue thriving for generations to come. The autumn air carried the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon as I unlocked the doors of our newest Golden Wheat location in downtown Healdsburg, 18 months after Marcus's departure from the company. The morning ritual of preparing for another day had become a meditation of sorts, grounding me in the tangible reality of what we had accomplished, despite the chaos and betrayal that had threatened to destroy everything. Each perfectly risen croissant and carefully crafted sourdough loaf represented a small victory against those who had underestimated my determination to preserve our family's legacy. The legal aftermath of Marcus's attempted fraud had concluded 6 months earlier with a settlement that exceeded even Patricia's optimistic projections. Roberto Castellanos had ultimately agreed to pay nearly $2 million in damages, acknowledging through his attorneys that his development company had engaged in inappropriate business practices that violated various consumer protection and partnership interference statutes. The settlement funds had allowed Golden Wheat to expand more aggressively than I had ever imagined possible, opening 4 new locations and establishing a production facility that supplied our products to specialty stores throughout the Pacific Northwest. More satisfying than the financial compensation was the public exposure of Roberto's manipulation tactics, which had led to investigations of his other business dealings and ultimately resulted in criminal charges for fraud and racketeering related to his systematic targeting of family-owned businesses. The investigation had revealed that his scheme against Golden Wheat was part of a larger pattern involving at least 12 other companies, generating headlines throughout California's business community and serving as a warning to other entrepreneurs about the sophisticated tactics used by predatory investors. Marcus had suffered his own consequences for participating in the fraud, though the legal system had been less harsh on him than Roberto given his cooperation with investigators once the scheme was exposed. His consulting firm in Los Angeles had quietly terminated his employment after learning about his role in the Golden Wheat situation, and his reputation in the business community had been permanently damaged by the ethical violations that came to light during the investigation. Word traveled quickly in professional circles about partners who betrayed their own families, making it difficult for him to find legitimate employment opportunities. The personal cost of his choices had been even more severe than the professional consequences. Our parents had been devastated by the revelation of his betrayal, struggling to understand how the son they had raised could have participated in such a calculated deception against his own sister. Family gatherings had become strained affairs, where Marcus's absence was felt as both a relief and a source of ongoing sadness for everyone involved. Our mother still occasionally asked whether I thought reconciliation was possible, though I had learned to deflect those conversations rather than engaging with hopes that felt unrealistic given the magnitude of trust that had been broken. The most unexpected development in the aftermath had been my relationship with James Rivera, the investigative journalist who had written the series of articles exposing Roberto's predatory business practices. James had initially contacted me as a source for his investigation, but our professional conversations had gradually evolved into something more personal, as we discovered shared values about integrity, family loyalty, and the importance of protecting vulnerable communities from exploitation. His work covering corporate fraud had given him insights into the psychological impact of betrayal that helped me process my own experience in ways that felt healing, rather than simply analytical. James understood the complexity of my emotions regarding Marcus in ways that surprised me with their accuracy and empathy. He had covered dozens of cases involving family business disputes, and had observed the particular pain that comes from being betrayed by someone who should have been the most trustworthy person in your professional life. His perspective helped me recognize that my anger and hurt were not only legitimate but necessary for establishing the boundaries that would protect me from future manipulation or abuse. Trust isn't something you can rebuild through good intentions or apologies, he had explained during one of our long conversations about the psychological aftermath of betrayal. It requires demonstrated commitment to changed behavior over extended periods, and even then, some violations are too fundamental to fully repair. The key is accepting that some relationships end permanently when core values are violated, and that accepting those endings can be healthier than trying to force reconciliation that ignores the reality of what happened. His words had given me permission to stop feeling guilty about my inability to forgive Marcus, or my unwillingness to engage with family pressure to rebuild our relationship. The betrayal had revealed fundamental differences in our values and character that made any future partnership impossible, regardless of whatever remorse he might feel about the consequences of his choices. Accepting that reality had been liberating in ways I hadn't expected, allowing me to focus my emotional energy on relationships and endeavors that were built on mutual respect and shared principles. The business success that followed Marcus's departure had vindicated my decision to fight for Golden Wheat, rather than accepting his manipulative reframing of the situation as a beneficial opportunity. Our revenue had increased by 60% over the 18 months since his resignation, driven by expansion into new markets and the development of product lines that honored our grandmother's recipes while appealing to contemporary tastes. The artisanal bread market had continued growing as consumers increasingly valued authentic, locally produced alternatives to mass-manufactured products. Our employee base had expanded from 35 to nearly 100 workers across all locations, with many of our original staff members accepting promotions to management positions that allowed them to share in the company's growth and success. The collaborative culture that had always characterized Golden Wheat had actually strengthened in the absence of Marcus's increasingly controlling and secretive management style, creating an environment where innovative ideas and operational improvements emerged from throughout the organization, rather than being mandated from above. The scholarship program we had established in our grandmother's memory had awarded educational support to 15 culinary students over the past year, with several recipients completing internships at our various locations before accepting permanent positions with other artisanal food businesses throughout Northern California. Watching young bakers develop their skills using techniques passed down through our family while adding their own creative innovations felt like the truest possible honor to Isabel's legacy and vision for what food could mean in people's lives. 3 months earlier, I had received an unexpected phone call from a literary agent who specialized in business memoirs, suggesting that my experience with Golden Wheat and the betrayal by Marcus could form the basis for a book that would help other entrepreneurs recognize and protect themselves from similar manipulation tactics. The idea had initially seemed uncomfortable, requiring me to relive painful experiences while exposing family conflicts to public scrutiny, but I had gradually become convinced that sharing the story could serve a valuable purpose in protecting other families from predatory schemes. The book project had connected me with other business owners who had survived partnership betrayals, forming an informal support network that met monthly to discuss challenges, share resources, and provide encouragement for members dealing with ongoing legal or emotional consequences of business fraud. The group included a restaurant owner whose partner had embezzled funds for gambling debts, a software developer whose co-founder had stolen proprietary code to start a competing company, and a retail entrepreneur whose brother had sold customer data to competitors while serving as the company's marketing director. Hearing similar stories of family members choosing personal gain over loyalty and integrity had helped me understand that Marcus's betrayal was part of a larger pattern of behavior that affected many successful family businesses. The combination of opportunity, rationalization, and external pressure created conditions that could corrupt even previously trustworthy individuals, particularly when sophisticated manipulators targeted their psychological vulnerabilities with precision and patience. Understanding the systemic nature of such betrayals had reduced my sense of personal responsibility for failing to prevent Marcus's choices while reinforcing my determination to help others avoid similar situations. The book proposal had attracted interest from several publishers, with the final manuscript scheduled for completion within 6 months. Working with a professional writer to organize my experiences into a coherent narrative had been both therapeutic and educational, forcing me to articulate lessons that had previously existed only as intuitive understanding gained through painful trial and error. The process had also revealed patterns in Roberto's manipulation tactics that could serve as warning signs for other potential targets of similar schemes. One of the most important insights that emerged from analyzing the entire experience was recognizing how gradually the manipulation had progressed, making it difficult to identify clear moments when intervention might have prevented the ultimate betrayal. Roberto and Sofia had carefully escalated their influence over Marcus through small steps that individually seemed reasonable or even beneficial, creating a psychological pathway that led him toward increasingly serious violations of trust and ethics, without triggering obvious alarm bells that might have prompted resistance or questioning. The sophistication of their approach had impressed even the federal investigators who ultimately prosecuted Roberto for his broader pattern of business fraud. They had identified psychological techniques borrowed from intelligence agencies and criminal organizations, adapted for use in corporate environments where family relationships and emotional attachments could be exploited to gain access and influence. The investigators had described Roberto as one of the most skilled manipulation specialists they had encountered, making Marcus's vulnerability more understandable, while not excusing his ultimate choices to participate in betraying his own family. 6 weeks ago, I had received a letter from Marcus, forwarded through Patricia's office since he apparently didn't have my current contact information. The letter was brief and formal, expressing regret for his actions and acknowledging the harm he had caused to both me personally and Golden Wheat as a business. He made no excuses for his behavior and didn't request forgiveness or reconciliation, simply stating that he wanted me to know that he understood the magnitude of his betrayal and took full responsibility for the consequences that had followed. The letter had generated complicated emotions that I was still processing, with the help of my therapist and the support network I had developed. Part of me felt relief that Marcus finally seemed to understand the seriousness of what he had done, while another part remained skeptical about whether his apparent remorse represented genuine change or simply another attempt to manipulate the situation for his benefit. The absence of any requests for forgiveness or suggestions about rebuilding our relationship had actually made the letter more credible, suggesting that he might finally respect my boundaries rather than trying to pressure me into premature reconciliation. I had chosen not to respond to the letter, a decision that felt appropriate given my commitment to protecting myself from further emotional manipulation while focusing on the positive aspects of my life and business. Engaging with Marcus in any capacity carried risks that seemed unnecessary, given how well Golden Wheat was functioning without his involvement, and how much peace I had found in accepting the permanent end of our partnership. Some bridges were meant to stay burned, and some relationships were healthier when they ended completely rather than continuing in damaged or artificial forms. The most recent development in the Golden Wheat story had been an acquisition offer from a major food corporation that wanted to purchase our recipes and brand recognition for expansion into national markets. The offer was substantial enough to make me financially independent for life, but it would have required giving up control over the company's operations and potentially seeing our artisanal approach replaced by mass production techniques that would compromise the quality and authenticity that defined our products. The decision-making process around the acquisition offer had been completely different from the pressure and deception that had characterized Marcus's interactions with Roberto 18 months earlier. I had consulted with Patricia, James, several trusted employees and industry experts who could provide objective analysis of the proposal's benefits and risks. Every aspect of the negotiation had been transparent and documented, with no hidden agendas or concealed compensation arrangements that might create conflicts of interest or ethical violations. After extensive consideration and consultation, I had declined the acquisition offer, choosing instead to maintain control over Golden Wheat's operations while exploring partnership opportunities that would allow us to expand our reach without compromising our values or quality standards. The decision felt consistent with my grandmother's vision and my own commitment to preserving the authenticity that made our products special, even if it meant accepting slower growth and more modest financial returns than would have been possible through corporate acquisition. The confidence I felt in making that decision independently represented a significant milestone in my recovery from the trauma of Marcus's betrayal. 18 months earlier, I had been devastated by the discovery that my closest partner and collaborator was secretly working against my interests, leaving me feeling isolated and uncertain about my ability to make sound business judgments without his input and collaboration. Now I was comfortable making complex strategic decisions based on my own analysis and the advice of people I had carefully chosen for their expertise and integrity. The employee meeting where I announced my decision to reject the acquisition offer had been one of the most satisfying moments in my professional life. The relief and excitement on the faces of workers who had worried about losing their jobs or seeing their workplace transformed into an impersonal corporate environment reinforced my conviction that preserving Golden Wheat's independence was the right choice for everyone involved. Several staff members had approached me afterward to express gratitude for prioritizing their job security and the company's mission over short-term financial gain. That evening, James and I had celebrated the decision with dinner at a small restaurant in Sebastopol that specialized in locally sourced ingredients and artisanal preparation methods similar to our own approach at Golden Wheat. The conversation had naturally turned to future plans for both the business and our personal relationship, which had been developing steadily despite my initial reluctance to become romantically involved with someone whose professional work intersected with my own traumatic experiences. "You've built something really special here," James had said as we walked through downtown Sebastopol after dinner, the October air crisp with the promise of winter ahead. "Not just the business success, but the way you've created an organization that reflects your values and serves your community. That's rare in any industry. And it's especially impressive given everything you've had to overcome to get here." His recognition of what Golden Wheat represented beyond its financial success meant more to me than any acquisition offer or business achievement could have provided. Our relationship had developed slowly and carefully. both of us conscious of the ways that my experiences with betrayal could affect my ability to trust and be vulnerable with someone new. James had been patient with my need to maintain independence and control over my life while gradually allowing him to become more important to me than I had expected when we first met. His understanding of the psychological impact of betrayal had been invaluable, but his respect for my boundaries and his commitment to transparency in all aspects of our relationship had been even more significant in helping me feel safe enough to consider a serious romantic partnership. 3 weeks ago, James had proposed marriage during a quiet weekend at his cabin in Mendocino County, presenting a ring that belonged to his grandmother, along with a carefully considered explanation of why he wanted to spend his life with someone who had demonstrated such strength and integrity under pressure. His proposal had been thoughtful and romantic without being manipulative or pressuring, giving me time and space to consider the decision without feeling rushed or coerced into responding immediately. I had accepted his proposal after a week of reflection, feeling confident that our relationship was built on the kind of mutual respect and shared values that could sustain a marriage through whatever challenges we might face together. The experience of surviving Marcus's betrayal had taught me to recognize authentic commitment and genuine partnership, making it easier to distinguish between James's sincere affection and the calculated manipulation I had witnessed in Sophia's relationship with my brother. The wedding planning process had been surprisingly enjoyable, free from the family drama and conflicting agendas that often complicated such events. My parents were delighted by my engagement to someone they respected and trusted, while James's family had welcomed me warmly despite the unconventional circumstances of our meeting and courtship. The absence of Marcus from wedding discussions felt natural rather than problematic, reflecting the reality that some relationships end permanently when fundamental trust is violated beyond repair. We had scheduled the wedding for the following spring, planning a small ceremony at the original Golden Wheat location in Sonoma, where James and I had shared our first conversation about the business and the values that guided my decisions. The venue felt appropriate for celebrating a relationship that had grown from professional respect into personal love, while honoring the place where I had rebuilt my life and career after experiencing the worst betrayal imaginable. Standing in the Healdsburg bakery on that autumn morning, reviewing sales figures that exceeded our projections while planning menu additions that would showcase seasonal ingredients from local farms, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction with the life I had created from the ashes of Marcus's betrayal. Golden Wheat was thriving under my leadership, our employees were prospering and growing professionally, our community was benefiting from our products and our economic contribution, and I was building a personal relationship based on honesty and mutual support rather than manipulation and hidden agendas. The journey from devastation to renewal had been longer and more difficult than I could have imagined when I first discovered Marcus's deception, but it had also been more rewarding than I had thought possible, when everything seemed hopeless and uncertain. Learning to trust my own judgment, building a business that reflected my values, and developing relationships based on authenticity rather than convenience had created a foundation for happiness that felt genuinely sustainable, rather than dependent on external validation or approval. The final chapter of the Golden Wheat story was still being written, with new opportunities and challenges emerging regularly as the business continued growing and evolving. But the fundamental questions about values, integrity, and family loyalty that had been raised by Marcus's betrayal had been answered definitively through my choices and actions over the past 18 months. Some things were worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost, and some people revealed their true character when tested by pressure and temptation. As I opened the doors for another day of serving customers who appreciated authentic artisanal products made with care and attention to quality, I felt grateful for the opportunity to honor my grandmother's legacy while building something that would endure long after the pain of betrayal had faded into memory. The morning sun illuminated the display cases filled with pastries and breads that represented generations of family knowledge and tradition, adapted for contemporary tastes but rooted in timeless principles of craftsmanship and integrity. The story of Marcus's betrayal would always be part of Golden Wheat's history, but it was no longer the defining narrative that shaped our future. Instead, it had become a lesson about the importance of protecting what matters most while remaining open to growth and change that honored authentic values, rather than compromising them for short-term advantage. The business thrived because it served a genuine purpose in people's lives, not because it maximized profit at the expense of quality or community connection. Walking through the bakery that morning, greeting employees who had become like family, and preparing for another day of creating products that brought joy to our customers, I understood that the most meaningful victory over betrayal was not revenge or punishment, but the successful preservation and continuation of what the betrayer had tried to destroy. Golden Wheat would continue honoring our grandmother's memory and serving our community long after Marcus's deception had been forgotten, and that permanence felt like the most satisfying justice imaginable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.